What's happening, Hardscapers? Today we're going to be talking about 5 ways you can cut pavers. Let's get into this. Now, these 5 ways to cut pavers can be applied to whether you are DIY, doing your own patio, or starting out as a contractor, trying to figure out which ways you're going to pursue to cut certain applications. We'll also throw retaining walls into this, different applications to use when cutting retaining wall. And I thought it reasonable that we're doing a cutting video, that throughout this video we'll play a saw in the background that I'll have to speak over top of. I'm just kidding. The first one is the most inefficient and most time consuming to do this. It's going to be tiresome as well. And this is actually using a hammer and chisel to chisel that paver or retaining wall. You can see in our video, we are hammering and chiseling a wall unit. And that's because we want to get that rock face from that wall unit to be used as a corner piece. So you'll see us chiseling wall units, but there is a more efficient way to do this as well. That being said, hammering and chiseling, you would just need about a 3-pound hammer and a cold chisel. It's going to be less costly for you because you just need a hammer and a chisel. It's going to be about 20 bucks. And you would just move around that paver unit or that wall unit and slowly score it and then start to get harder and harder with your hits on that chisel. Eventually what's going to happen is that piece is going to fall right off and it's going to expose a rough rock face to it. And like I said, that's good for retaining wall units that have corners, but it's not so good with pavers where that rock face might protrude a little bit and not be completely perpendicular to the face of that paver. And in that sense, you're gonna have to chisel more to get that off, and then you finally have a piece that you can use. But if you're off slightly with one of your hits, especially on the top of that paver, which is gonna be showing, that chisel mark is gonna show. And like I said, this is the most inefficient and time-consuming way to go about this. A step up from this would be using a guillotine. And this is a metal guillotine that allows you to move it up and then put the unit underneath, lining it up with the blade where it comes down and puts pressure on that wall unit or on that paver to then split it. If you're opting between chiseling or using a guillotine, I would opt for the guillotine because it does give you a nice perpendicular rock face for the most part. It's also less time consuming. It's a bit more efficient, and it's definitely the way we go when it comes to rock facing retaining walls, or in this case, coping units. Now, the positives with using a guillotine or with using a hammer and chisel is that there is barely any dust in the process of doing this. When you get into cutting concrete pavers or retaining wall blocks, there's going to be dust flying around everywhere, or you can cut wet and reduce that dust. But when you're using a guillotine or you are hammering and chiseling, there's gonna be barely any dust, which is a positive. Additionally, with guillotine, this is going to probably require you to rent it if you're a DIYer or invest into one if you are getting into hardscaping. So the investment is a little bit more than just a hammer and chisel. And the results are fairly similar, but you will be more efficient with the guillotine. The next step up from this is using an angle grinder. And I've never used an angle grinder for a lot of cuts. I use it for those detailed cuts and shaving down pavers if need be, but I've always got one on hand. This is like a 4-inch angle grinder, but you can get them up to about 9 inches or so. Like I said, I would never use an angle grinder for a lot of cuts. These would just be for detailed cuts. Think cutting around objects like a downspout or certain conduit lines that are also coming down from the house. Using an angle grinder is going to allow you to get more detailed with those cuts and to get the perfect cut. Additionally, when you're cutting, the smaller the blade, the tighter the radius you can follow with your blade. So if you need a very tight radius cut, an angle grinder is going to provide you the best option to get that tight radius. When it comes to cutting pavers, as opposed to hammering and chiseling or using a guillotine, using an angle grinder is the most inefficient. It would also require you to be on your knees when you're cutting or to be really hunched over and using your back to cut those pavers. Also, angle grinders don't come with a hose hookup, so that dust is going to be flying everywhere. That being said, I've always got an angle grinder on me just in case for those detailed cuts. And the next option would be a demo saw, and every hardscaper is going to have one of these, and if you're a DIY, you can easily rent one from your local shop. If you've never used one before, it does take some getting used to, and learning a few safety tips with this will help you in the long run. You can usually get a 12, 14, or 16-inch demo saw, plus there's many more sizes to go along with that. You can also get little tiny battery operated ones that are about 9 inches. So really that can replace your angle grinder for the most part. The best part about a demo saw, especially for cutting pavers, is that you can cut the pavers in place. So you're not marking a cut, picking it up, taking it over to your cut area, and then cutting it. You can mark your entire curve or straight cuts with a chalk line or a soapstone and be able to follow that line with your demo saw. It is the most efficient way to cut pavers by far. And that's why most hardscapers are going to have a demo saw on them at all times. And then a good part about having a demo saw is that most of them actually have a water hookup to them, so you can cut wet or you can cut dry. We'll talk about that at the end of the video here. The downside to demo saws is they're more expensive than anything else that we've already talked about here on the list, though they're easily accessible to rent, and I recommend to rent if you're just doing a one-off project there, but definitely an investment into a demo saw is worthwhile. The downside to a demo saw would be that they're heavy, at least heavier than the other options that we've already talked about on this list, and that would be the only downside that comes to mind here. And then the final method to cutting pavers or retaining wall block would be a table saw. And personally, I have an IQ Power Tools table saw. It cuts down the dust with its integrated vacuum system, so we can cut dry with it. You don't cut wet with it, but that dry cutting is going to vacuum away all the dust, collect it, and you can dispose of it. It's extremely effective in being able to collect that dust, and we really love our IQ saw. Now, we won't use IQ saws for many paver cuts, as we'll likely opt for our demo saw in that case, but we will use our IQ saw for any coping cuts or any retaining wall block cuts. That's because the main benefit to a table saw is that you get those perfect perpendicular cuts. Prior to having a table saw, I would be using my demo saw. It has built-in wheels on it, and I would set up my cuts on an actual skid and just wheel my way into that cut. It worked fairly well, but I just prefer the perfection that comes with a table saw. Now, most table saws besides IQ Power Tools do come with a water hookup, so you can cut wet with them as well. So that will also help in cutting down that dust. The downside to table saws is that they're less portable than anything else that we've talked about on this list, and they're likely the most expensive option than anything else on this list. And because they're the least portable, we'll opt for a demo saw for paver cuts when we can cut in place, and we'll use our table saw for those coping cuts or for those retaining wall block cuts. And finally, we're just going to talk about cutting wet versus cutting dry, the benefits and cons of both here. Cutting wet is ideal, especially for the client that you're working on the project on or the neighbors, because cutting dry will throw dust everywhere, and it's a significant amount of dust that will be spewed everywhere. So cutting wet cuts down on that dust. It also protects our health as installers, and it'll increase the longevity of your diamond blade, as well as that water will cool down that blade and provide a little bit of lubrication to the blade as you're cutting. That being said, the con to cutting wet is that there's slurry everywhere. And what slurry is that dust mixed in with water, and if it stays on the surface of your pavers, it'll harden and it'll be a complete pain to get rid of. If you're cutting wet, you're gonna want to cut and then rinse off the surrounding area as much as possible. Especially if you're cutting along a foundation or something important is behind you when you're cutting, you're gonna wanna protect that with like a piece of plywood or something there, because that slurry will spew out from behind your blade and attach onto anything and harden. Like I said, this is a major con to cutting wet and why most people don't like doing it. Not to mention you're likely going to get wet in the process. Cutting dry, on the other hand, saves you from that slurry mess and any other mess that slurry will cause you to have to clean up. The problem with that is you've got another mess, which is the dust that has blown around everywhere. Makes you look a little less professional. Also, it's a health hazard if you're not wearing your dust mask, and it will get everywhere. So you're going to want to take a blower and blow everything off. You could have dust all over your pavers, and if water gets on that, that becomes slurry and that will harden and cause a mess as well. Cutting dry, though not ideal, will save you in that mess, and it's much more efficient and quicker. However, a lot of regions have a dust law where you actually can't cut dry unless you've got a vacuum integrated system like the IQ Power Tools saw. And those are our methods to cutting. Those are 5 ways that you can cut pavers, retaining wall blocks, or whatever you need. If you want to learn more about cutting pavers or the installation of interlocking concrete pavement, of course, is available on our members only platform. That's members.howtohardscape.com. Link will be in the description below. And in addition to that, if you're a business owner, along with that members only platform is a subscription to our project management software, the How to Hardscape Headquarters, which will help you budget, estimate, and so much more. Comment below anything else that you would want to add to this list, any changes that you would recommend to anything that I've talked about here. Leave a comment in the comment section below, as well as any questions that you have. Like this video if you found it helpful for whatever reason, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more hardscaping content like this. Thank you so much for watching.